Kara Nichols, an aspiring model, has not been seen since the beginning of October. Kara was last seen back on October 9th, leaving her Colorado Springs home after telling friends she was headed to Denver.
Nearly 2 months after she was last seen here near her home, the massive search for 19-year-old Kara Nichols continues.
October 9th, 2012 is the last time Kara Nichols was seen alive. She has never been heard from since.
Law enforcement says they have found the possible remains of 19-year-old Kara Nichols.
Colorado Springs police say the body of Kara Nichols has been found in Black Forest.
Her case has been cold since 2012.
Kara was loved in 2012 just as much as she is in 2022.
In 2012, 19-year-old aspiring model Kara Nichols disappeared without a trace. She told her roommate she was on her way to a photo shoot, but she was never heard from or seen again. After a controversial investigation leading only to dead ends, her case grew colder and colder. Was she the victim of her own choices? Was she trafficked? Was there a possibility that she was still alive? Her family never found the answer to those questions. Until this year. After almost a decade, a man has been arrested after the remains of Kara were found not far from where she was last seen. The suspect has been charged with her murder, but this is just the beginning. We're about to find out what really happened to Kara Nichols. On May 20th of 1993, Kara Nancy Nichols was born. She grew up in Colorado Springs, and she was the middle child of Paul and Julia Nichols. Her teenage years were not easy for her. When she was 13, she was caught shoplifting and had to do community service. During high school, she fell into a deep depression after losing the family dog, and although she was taken into counseling and prescribed medication, Kara didn't want to take it, affecting her recovery. In addition to her mental health struggles, Kara started using drugs, affecting her behavior as well. Her addiction also influenced her studies, and she had to change high schools in order to graduate. Regardless, she made it and got her diploma, and began waiting tables at a local restaurant. However, what she really wanted to pursue was modeling. Kara loved fashion and modeling, and she managed to find a few photo shoots here and there to get her career started. She also signed up to a platform to connect models with jobs and vice versa. Although she was only starting out, she was very excited to be pursuing that path. But in the summer of 2012, Kara's family made the move to Chicago, and her drug problem got worse. Her parents, worried as they were seeing their daughter fall deeper and deeper into addiction, enrolled her in a rehab program that could get her the treatment she needed. But just like in high school, Kara didn't like being told what to do, and she was asked to leave the program when she couldn't comply with the rules. After leaving treatment, Kara moved back to Colorado on her own. She found some roommates and decided to focus all of her attention on modeling. She was trying to get her life back together and was determined to make it on her own. However, 2 months after moving back to her native Colorado Springs, Kara would disappear. Kara left the apartment on the evening of October 9th, 2012. She was on her way to a modeling shoot in Denver, or at least that's what she told her roommate, who saw her get into a dark sedan that was waiting to pick her up outside the building. When she never made it back that night, her roommates called and texted but received no response. Her brother was living nearby, and he too received radio silence when trying to contact his sister. After 2 days of no responses to any of his calls or texts, he went to the police to file a missing persons report. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office got to work. The first place they searched was Kara's room in the house she shared with 3 roommates. Inside they found all of her essential belongings, her ID, all of her clothes, her laptop, cash, even her phone charger. It didn't seem like she'd taken anything someone who was running away would take. Considering her social media, phone, and bank account had shown no activity in the past 2 days, it was very unlikely this was a voluntary disappearance. Her phone had last pinged a location close to her home in the direction of Denver, shortly after her roommate saw her leave. Suspicions about foul play grew more and more. Kara's family flew in from Chicago as soon as a missing persons report was filed, and for the next few months tried to assist in everything they could. They were convinced Kara was in trouble, and they felt police weren't doing enough to find her. And this feeling only increased when police made a discovery. As well as modeling jobs, Kara was also working as an escort and finding clients online. In November of 2012, a month after she disappeared, her profile was found on a Las Vegas escort website. However, when following up on that profile, they discovered someone had used Kara's pictures to open a fake account, and she was not in Las Vegas.
Tell us everything you know about this photo. How did you discover it?
We had gained some tips a few days ago from folks calling in, letting us know that they had seen the ad come up and there was information that Kara might be in the Las Vegas area. After that, we did our own research into that ad, and through the investigative efforts of our detectives, they were in fact able to determine that someone had simply used a photo of Kara, and Kara was not in fact involved with the posting of that ad.
However, digging deeper into the escort services, they discovered that since 2010, Kara had been offering services as a sex worker and had allegedly had a falling out with someone she worked for. Police suspected Kara had run into trouble in a matter of drugs and sex work. Some of the clients she was in contact with at the time were also interviewed, but none were considered suspects, and there was no evidence followed that suggested any of them had taken part in her mysterious disappearance. This, as we've learned recently, was a huge mistake. But with no solid leads, no body, and no records of where she could be, the family felt police were giving up, not following up on potential clues or leads, and treating Kara's case as cold, long before it was supposed to. Since the family felt the sheriff's office wasn't doing enough to find Kara, they took matters into their own hands and began asking for help through Facebook. Many tips came into the page about potential sightings, but none were ever solid enough to follow up on. One of the tips paved the way to a theory that held up during most of the next few years. Someone had reported seeing Kara in Long Island, being held against her will at a sex trafficking ring. But when investigated, that lead proved to be false, and no sign of Kara was ever found in Long Island. Regardless, many believe this wasn't too far off from the truth, and Kara could have been trafficked. The Nichols family's main complaint about the investigation is how the police were hesitant to treat Kara as a victim. Since most of the leads followed led to dead ends, they were pressing on the theory that she had left voluntarily. Although they agreed there was clearly something off about the way she left, there was also no confirmation that something had indeed happened to her. This theory troubled the family since there were a number of things that didn't add up to explain why she would just fall off the face of the earth. Another theory police leaned into was that Kara either took her own life or overdosed. But since there was no body to be found, neither of these theories were strong enough. Her body would have turned up by now. The trafficking theory seemed to be the only one that held up, but according to the Nichols family, police never pursued it enough, and eventually the potential trails grew colder and colder, leaving Kara Nichols' disappearance remain a mystery for almost a decade. Over the next 10 years, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office found itself mixed into accusations of corruption, and the sheriff in charge of her case at the time stepped down. A recording even surfaced in which he was heard admitting that not enough was being done regarding Kara Nichols' case. In less than a decade, 4 different officers have led the case with no new leads or evidence found until early 2022, when several cold cases were reviewed. The new detective appointed to the case in 2020 decided to interview a witness they weren't able to contact the first time around.
A cold case review was recently being conducted on this case, as we do with all our cold cases, and a witness in this case was located and re-interviewed. There was critical information given in that interview which provided a significant new lead.
This was the interview that cracked the case, and it turns out the answer was right there all along. Christina Hollendorfer was married to Joel Hollendorfer when, in 2014, during a car ride together, he confessed to something shocking. 2 years earlier, he had hired the services of a sex worker, and while having sex in his car, he'd accidentally strangled her. Then he'd moved the body to his parents' farm nearby, and buried her remains in an old horse grave with plastic bags and lime. With this incredible information presented, police got a warrant to investigate said farm, and sure enough, just where Christina had said it would be, buried in one of the horse graves, a bag containing human remains was found. These remains were quickly identified and matched Kara Nichols' DNA. She had been right there all this time. Joel Hollendorfer was arrested immediately and charged with second-degree murder and evidence tampering.
District Attorney's Office upgraded the charges for 46-year-old Joel Hollendorfer. He was originally facing second-degree murder with a $1 million bond, but now he's facing first-degree murder, the most serious charge you can face in Colorado, meaning a judge has to look very closely at all the evidence, and if there's enough proof in the judge's opinion that he was guilty, he will not be allowed to be bonded out before trial.
But if Christina knew about this all along, why had she never come forward? Apparently, according to records, police tried to contact her in 2014, but she never returned detectives' calls. And the reason she was called was because the investigation had led straight to her now ex-husband's door. In 2013, after obtaining Kara's phone records, they saw that the night she disappeared she had spoken to one number just before she went missing. The number was Joel's, and when interviewed, he told investigators that he hired the services of a sex worker and he'd spoken to Kara, but he never actually met her. However, evidence suggested otherwise, since Kara's phone pinged very close to a farm that belonged to Hollendorfer's parents. In October of 2014, the property was searched using cadaver dogs and a ground-penetrating radar to detect any places where the soil and dirt may have been disturbed. Joel's mother was there and showed investigators around, commenting on the fact that the property had been used to bury the family horses that passed away for decades. For reasons unknown and not stated on record, none of the graves on the property were ever dug up, and Kara's remains, which were already there, were never found. According to Joel's now ex-wife, Joel told his parents what he'd done, so was there a possibility that his mother allegedly knew in which direction not to point investigators? We also don't know why Christina kept Joel's secret for 8 years, while the family of Kara Nichols followed impossible leads and inconclusive clues. Since the discoveries on this case are very recent, there's still a long way to go to answer all these questions and understand exactly what happened that night almost a decade ago. But fortunately, Kara's case is on the way to being solved. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the Back of the Archive if you don't want to miss any updates, and leave a comment so we can discuss the case. I'll see you very soon.